How did you get started? What led you to becoming a production designer? Did you love movies as a child, or what was the process?
It wasn't movies specifically. When I was at school, or in my hometown, my school in my hometown, there was a tradition there of doing musical operettas, Gilbert and Sullivan particularly. And I wasn't a great academic student, and I was always, hanging around the art room. My mother discovered quite late on in her life that she had a talent for painting. She was 65. I was not appearing in the Yeoman of the Guard, it was the Gilbert and Sullivan thing, and I was painting scenery, in fact painting the stone walls of the Tower of London, and somebody behind me, a member of staff, admired it, and I was totally surprised really that I should have created any interest at all from anybody else, and that was a little trigger. And later on in my school life, I did some amateur theatre work. Used to paint scenery for 2 complimentary tickets a week, and there were 2 theatres in my hometown, and I worked in both of them. And at the same time, pursued my art, went to the local art school, then went to a London art school, did work in London theatre, and just kind of my theatre work and my sort of day job, as it were, my day work was as a student at London Art School. As art students do here, I, at the end of my course, looked for a kind of postgraduate course, and the Royal College here in London had a course in film design. And I thought, well, I can maximise my chances of getting in here, and just using my theatre experience. And so that was it. And I was being pragmatic, really, in saying, going to film school. Thought, well, this is a way to develop the experience I have, and possibly even a way to have a better paid career. So that's what I did, and it was film forevermore after that, really. When I left the Royal College, I got a job on the first Casino Royale film, the one with everybody in it. Peter Sellers, David Niven, Woody Allen. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
Oh, I've seen it. I think I've seen almost everything you've ever done, with the exception of Saturn City. That I have not seen.
It's not a good film, Casino Royale, but anyway, it was a good education. It was
lots of famous people in it. There is that.
Sorry?
There are lots of famous people in it. There is that.
Yeah, exactly. But as I say, as a way of, as a quick introductory course to film technique, it was pretty good, I have to say. It couldn't be better, in fact.
And you were doing art direction for that?
No. I was very, very junior. I made the blueprints and made the tea, and there's very much a tradition of that in the movie industry, that you start in one of these junior positions, and you serve an apprenticeship, and you kind of work your way up. And
well, making tea for Peter Sellers, that's kind of entertaining, though, I would say.
I didn't dare go anywhere near Peter Sellers. I was making the tea for the art directors and the guys in the art department. But
so then from there, you got involved in terms of working with Richard Attenborough, yeah?
Yeah, well, I served quite a long apprenticeship, about 12 years, from that, tea boy to draftsman to art director, was about a 12-year process. I worked for Richard Attenborough actually on Gandhi in that period, but it was one of those false starts that he had. I mean, he tried to make that movie for 20 years, and there was, as I say, we set up an art department, did some work. I was working for another designer, a designer called Michael Stringer at that stage, and then it fell through, it didn't happen, so I went on, did other things, and then eventually, as I say, 12 years later, got to design my own, the first film of my own. And I think the third film I did was Gandhi, which was, was
huge.
One so green and and comparatively new as a designer. That was a big challenge, I have to say.
So yeah, that was one thing I was going to ask you about. Is when you got the job of doing Gandhi, did you feel like you had built up enough knowledge and experience that you felt like you were ready for it, or did it feel just enormous at the time?
Over my 12-year apprenticeship, I did begin towards the end to feel, I can do this, I've got to do this, in fact. And so I was ready for it in that sense, I was. And I was also smart enough to choose a very, very good, two art directors actually to go with me, both of whom were older than I and more experienced than I. And looking back on it, that was a pretty smart move, I have to say.
And you have worked with a lot of people consistently in your career since then, yeah? There's a lot of people I see when I was looking through that you've been working with for a while. Williamson.
Yeah.
And, you've got a lot of, and then the graphic designers are the same. And so, what do you think is... what's your take on the way you use color? Because it seems to me you always have, for one thing, the difference between black and white in color, because I love the Elephant Man, but I see a lot of shadow and light and almost using your gray tones as color. But then you also do definitely use it as a character in your movies, it feels like.
I think, yes, I think, and I hope that's true, I think there's a tradition here, maybe here more than in America, or certainly more than in California, of kind of limiting the palette. Maybe it's because we live in a grey, rainy place. Our sensibility is just different. But with Stephanie McMillan, the decorator,
right. Mm-hmm.
I consult all the time on matters of colour, and we do have this technique of limiting the palette very, very severely, and so that the subtlest of colours, of colour changes register quite strongly. So that I also do love to, obviously, to have build sets with potential for dark shadows, and initially consider each set as something abstract and as a piece of sculpture, literally a piece of abstract sculpture, and with a lot of thought given to how it might be lit and so on. Now, obviously, it's a communal activity, and I need to talk to the director of photography, the cameraman, about that. And so I try, as well as consulting with the director right from the off, the cameraman, as soon as he is available, becomes an essential part of the plan. And so, as I say, color.
You pull in more color. So you start out with a limited palette, and then you add color based on kind of what calls for it, and where it makes sense to add it in the image.
I think I would say almost every, certainly in Hogwarts, or almost every color is muted, has a lot of grey. So we work in sort of grey greens, grey ochre, grey, and it's limited in that way. Mm-hmm. Occasionally, you might go for a sharp colour, or you go for reflective colour. In the Harry Potter films, we've used a lot of gold leaf. Actually brass leaf. Gold leaf being fairly expensive. We've used brass leaf, but because it gives it a kick, and it has a quality that gold spray paint could never have.
And that even if you pull out all of the color, you're still going to get some slap of color by using the brass?
Yes.
Huh.
But it's more for its reflective quality than for its yellow gold color. I guess it's a combination of both. But
so it's playing with light as well as color.
Yes, exactly.
And in reference to when you're doing all of these projects, and you've got the producer and the director, and then in this case, in the case of Harry Potter, you've got the author. How does the involvement work? Who gets called in first, and how do you figure out the process and the collaboration of all those people together?
There was a promise made by David Heyman, the producer, to JK Rowling that we would be faithful to the spirit of the books, but she understood that we could never include everything. There had to be huge omissions, and I think she was very, very brave in allowing the films to be their own separate entity. She quite accepted from the beginning that books and movies could be separate, and so we consulted her when we consulted her initially, and she literally gave me a map of Hogwarts, a map of the world, which she did a drawing of at the first meeting in a hotel lobby, and that became a massive aid, direction, help and starting point from her. So we consulted her throughout the series when there were questions. The director-producer relationship, the designer would always kind of address the director first. An initial conversation with the director to understand his priorities, and then I would prepare a sketch, a model in the art department, and go back to him and show it. And then at that stage, maybe introduce the producers to the idea so that they were up to speed on what was happening. But it's really that dialogue between the director and the designer which is essential, and which is, you follow that path wherever it leads.
And so this is after the script has been written and you're reading over the script. Do you go back and, whether it's Harry Potter or some of the other movies you've worked on are based on books as well, or novels, do you read the novels back and, like over and over and over, so that you get a sense of some of the elements and the novels, or do you try to stick strictly to with the script that's written, the screenplay?
Yeah, no, I think the background information is important as well. So quite early on, the Harry Potter books were issued as spoken books, as CDs. So that helped. I would read the novel and then listen to it in the car on the way to the studio several times. And
Stephen Fry's version?
Stephen Fry's version.
Okay.
Here, and I know you had Jim Dale.
I like both of them.
Reading them.
I've listened to them both. Yeah.
I like both of them. Yeah, but essential, and not just reading the novels, but then there's a researcher, Celia Barnett, who worked with us on all the films, and I find that process important too, that she was researching things like, medieval clock mechanisms, and because in The Prisoner of Azkaban, this clock is important. She would research medieval architecture, the tapestries in the common room. Celia found in the Gryffindor common room, those bright red tapestries are actually from a museum in Cluny in Paris.
I think I know those.
All of that happens simultaneously. Sorry.
I think I know those tapestries you're talking about, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tapestries with a unicorn. Yeah.
Exactly. Oh, they have such a life. Those tapestries are so beautiful and very joyful, which is a really nice element of those particular pieces.
Yes.
So, in terms of the Harry Potter movies, has there been something where you've done everything and it's been filmed, and then you look at it and you realize it just doesn't quite have what you're after, and you have to go back and change something?
Well, one big thing, in the beginning, the Sorcerer's Stone or the Philosopher's Stone, we were obliged to use existing locations quite a lot because we didn't have the time or the money to build the entire world. When we then cut to a big exterior of Hogwarts, those real places, Gloucester Cathedral, Durham Cathedral, Christ Church College, Oxford, all had to be sort of incorporated into the complex, which was Hogwarts School. And this gave, I must say, not a very satisfying silhouette. And I was at pains in subsequent movies, and fortunately the script had made different demands anyway and required different geography. You know, if we had had all 7 books from the beginning, then certain of those early decisions would not have been made, those early choices of location, because they didn't fit with the action in later books. But anyway, we didn't have that, so we used, as I say, bits of cathedrals, bits of Christchurch College, and then when obliged to make those changes in subsequent movies, I did take that opportunity to improve the silhouette of Hogwarts, just to make it more magical, less. It was confused, and although it was always huge and complicated, it did progressively get more elegant. Nobody seemed to mind. They seemed to accept that it was just part of a magical world, and
always changing.
Things did change from film to film. They did.
Well, I would imagine, though, not having all of the books at once was a source of excitement, though, for you, since you have worked on all of them, to get a new book and discover something that you get to sink your teeth into as an artist and work on.
Absolutely.
And so what would you say in the last book was a couple of the really exciting, when you first read the book, that you were really excited about getting an opportunity to express visually?
Well, that's absolutely true. I mean, there were, the ministry suddenly appeared, and that was a huge challenge, and every book produced something new. In the last book, in the 7th book, which we split, as you know, into 2 parts, into 2 movies, the challenge of the first part is that we don't go to Hogwarts at all. The entire film takes place with the kids on the run from Voldemort and the Ministry now turned bad. They're hunted and they're on the run. So it's a series of locations, physical locations, and sometimes built sets. There's a frozen forest with a frozen pool, and the sword of Gryffindor at the bottom of the frozen lake. That's a set on a soundstage here in London, which has to be integrated with a bit of real forest that precedes it. So, that was a challenge there. Something we were quite unfamiliar with, really, was travelling to distant locations for landscapes specifically. In part 2, the great challenge is the destruction of Hogwarts. And you have to, don't just knock holes in what you've got. You really have to consider that as a new set. And again, this all-important idea of strong profiles, making strong images.
And all that fire and all the light coming through, and all these big sections that are knocked down.
The light, the sun rising behind the smoke, all those considerations. But as I say, the big challenge was these massive, remains of destroyed walls. The entrance hall, the front of the Great Hall, part of the roof of the Great Hall, completely gone. A big challenge there, and an enjoyable one too. Really, it's maybe it helped me and the guys in the art department sort of prepare for the end. Really, we demolished it before we had to strike it completely.
Well, that might have been good catharsis.
Exactly.
What about when I think about the 2 last movies, and I was trying to imagine what would be really fun that because I listen to the books a lot. The Lovegood House and The Wedding, and then at the beginning with the manor and the body hanging. Those were the ones I thought, if I were someone putting together the visuals of those scenes, those would have been the most exciting parts of the movie.
I think you're right. The Malfoy Manor, the Malfoy House, is a very strong architectural set. The exterior is based on an Elizabethan house here in this country called Hardwick Hall, and it has massive windows, and these windows are kind of blinded out. The shutters are drawn, and so they're like blind windows, which have a real kind of presence, an ominous presence. So that gave us the basis of a good exterior. There's an extraordinary magical roof added and surrounded by forest, which isn't there in reality, but again is one of our
license
devices to make it more threatening, more mysterious.
Yes.
And then the interior, 2 floors with 2 sets on stages, very, very muscular architecture, very strong architectural form. So that was, great to get into that. The Lovegood house is a tower. JK Rowling says it's a black tower in an empty landscape. So that's exactly what it is. But I again took great care over the sculptural shape of that tower, and so it's. But
the interior is fantastic.
Yeah,
it's crazy, and so it's very.
Luna and her father certainly both have sort of eccentric interests. Luna, we asked Luna and Ivana, the actress, to actually help us with this. That she had painted, decorated the interior with painted decoration on the walls, little murals and stuff, and so that was. Great.
The actress actually painted.
Yeah, well, she designed. We asked it. She proved herself very good at this. Was it in Harry Potter 6 where she wore the lion's mask?
Right.
It was the lion's headdress.
And she made that herself.
She designed that, and so we thought, we'll harness this ability again, this talent again, and ask her to do these wall paintings. And so she did designs for them, which we then reproduced.
And Xenophilius is new to that movie, right?
Yes.
So it's exciting to be able to create the world of a new character, yeah?
Exactly. And he prints has a printing press, and one floor of this black tower is entirely consumed with his printing operation, the Quibbler, the Magical Worlds magazine, the Quibbler. So the press was good. All that printing apparatus was great fun for Stephanie, the set decorator.
And you made all of the furniture in curves?
Not exactly. There is a sort of spiral staircase up to the center of this. Yeah, some sort of fitted bits. Are made to fit the curved walls, but it's eccentrically furnished, as you'll see. You haven't seen it, have you?
No, Monday. I wish I had before I was talking to you, but I'm excited. Now it'll be even more fun to see it after I talk to you. Well, one of the things I thought was most interesting about specifically the Lovegood and the wedding juxtaposed against the beginning of the movie is the sharp contrast in dark and the shadows, and then when I think of the book, I think of the one, little joyful moment in the book is the wedding, even though of course it winds up a mess. But at the beginning of it, it's beautiful and there's a lot of light. And so, how did you work that contrast?
Well, we decided with the wedding that it should be as wedding receptions often are, in a tent, in a marquee. And that marquee should sit in this flat, marshy, weedy landscape outside the Weasley house. So the big question was, do I make it the same, an extension of the Weasley house with the same kind of eccentricity, the same kind of rather amateurish, homemade feeling about everything, or do we do something different? Well, obviously the fun thing is something different. And since Bill Weasley was marrying Fleur Delacour, we could say that Fleur's parents had a big influence on this wedding. In fact, Monsieur Delacour would probably pay for it as the father of the bride. And so that permitted us a French influence. And so we really went for that. There's a soft, very refined interior, silk, hanging silk. The tent is lined with. There are floating candles in little French 18th century candelabra. And so the whole thing has a very elegant and quite unweaselly look about it.
And how much would you say of your own artistic aesthetic gets put into the work that you do, specifically Harry Potter, because that's what we're talking about right now, but on the whole, would you say? I mean, do you think you're more corralling other artists and then you just do these simple drawings? And because it seems like since the artistic buck kind of stops with you, it feels like you do have to infuse a lot of, and also kind of harness as many different styles and artistic designs as you can in your work.
Yes. I think in different categories, there's probably a different answer. Everything architectural, I think I have a great deal of, not just control of, but is what I'm passionate about and reflects my interests and input and so on. Along with Stephanie McMillan, the set decorator we've already mentioned, we've worked together as a team for a long time now, since Richard Attenborough's Chaplin, I think, was the first time. So there's a ready understanding there of the architectural part and the decoration of that thereafter. And we've talked about colour and so on. There are a team of concept artists working in the art department with me. 2 and 3 of them sometimes were concerned exclusively with creatures. There are a lot of magical creatures in Harry Potter, Thestrals and Hippogriffs and,
they're everywhere.
They're everywhere. And so these guys, Rob Bliss I'm thinking of, Paul Catling, they have a fantastic facility for designing anatomically correct or credible but extraordinary magical creatures. And so in the case of the creatures, I am the facilitator, as you say, the head of the department that in which they work, but it's their creative input that gets us there. And they draw absolutely spectacularly well. They draw like Raphael, like Leonardo, they do. So beautiful drawings. There's another illustrator who is Andrew Williamson. I've used architectural illustrator, and so I will do a rough doodle of a set, the Lovegood House, the Malfoy Manor, and we'll also do a plan and elevation, quite a rough preliminary one, but nonetheless to scale, because I love to think, imagine it dealing with real dimensions right from the beginning, knowing exactly how big it is and exactly the size of one thing against another. And I give those early pencil sketches and the plan and elevation to Andrew. He will then build a digital model in the computer, and together we will spin it, walk through it, choose an angle, and say, okay, that's it. Render that, illustrate that. And he, over the 10-year period, he started with pencil drawings and watercolor washes, but technology has changed so fast. He now does these amazing renderings, which become so well finished that you can barely tell them apart from from stills from the movie, directly from the movie. You can mistake, as I say, some of these concept sketches as shots from the movie.
Does he still create some what they call analog art after you've gone through and seen all of these digital images, or is it pretty much all inside the computer now?
It's all inside the computer now.
And when did that switch completely?
It is now.
When did that switch completely?
It didn't switch suddenly. It kind of goes. There was as I say, in the beginning, he would take my things and then himself do a pencil drawing on watercolor paper, and put colour washes on it, watercolour washes on it. There was then, having got the computer, there was a period in the middle where he would make the drawing on the computer, print it out onto watercolour paper, and still do the washes, and then took the big leap. And as I said, the whole thing was on the computer. And also, I think what Andrew took from us and from the movie tradition of art director sketches, designer sketches, the idea of lighting. He came from architectural practice, helped architects do these overviews of architectural schemes, but the lighting in those traditionally is fairly bland, whereas of course lighting of movie sets is often dramatic and spectacular, and so that you see from the first film to the last film, the lighting in these concept sketches has changed enormously and has got much stronger and better and more exciting.
Do you, as a film goer or as somebody who appreciates movies, are there some in particular that you go back to just in terms of being a fan and using them as inspiration?
I have design heroes. Ferdinando Scarfiotti, who worked for Bertolucci.
Yep.
And
well, you see that in The Mission, that's for sure. In The Mission.
Yes. I think Scarfiotti was certainly the best designer of my generation. He died tragically young and didn't get to do so much. But that Italian classicism that he was born with, it was in his blood, in his genes, and he just had such style and a facility for doing things beautifully and elegantly.
Is there a particular movie in specific that you love the most of his?
Well, The Sheltering Sky is beautiful. The Last Emperor.
Yeah.
So there's a quirky movie called Toys, which he did for Barry Levinson, which wasn't a successful movie, but it was beautifully designed, really beautifully designed.
And very complicated because you're talking about tiny little interior shots that require a lot of specialty lighting and that sort of thing. So that
yes.
That's hard to do. That's a little bit like that in the beginning of the series of Harry Potter, underneath the, where Harry lived. Those tiny shots that are really tight because they require a certain type.
Yeah. There's a great American designer, Dean Tavares, who worked for Francis Ford Coppola. And Tavares has a kind of great classical way of doing things, and has a great eye, and it's all about making pictures, making sculpture, making pictures, and another hero there, really.
And so when you're watching something that he's done, you'll actually stop and look at it and know technically what he's done and be inspired by it? Yes. Is there a particular scene you're thinking of? No, I mean, because sometimes, I do that sometimes because I've been watching movies for so long that, although some of it is your work, but I'll stop and watch and just think, I have no idea how it's done because that's not what I do, but I just marvel at how much had to go into the thought behind the way that particular scene was designed.
Yeah. What's the movie about Las Vegas that Coppola did? I can't remember. He took over a studio in Hollywood called Zoetrope.
Right.
And I was working in a building, in an empty shop next to Zoetrope, preparing a film from Mel Brooks. And Tavares was working on this. And I remember walking onto one of their stages one day and just seeing that he was using the most theatrical of techniques. I mean, painted ground rose, painted backing, forced perspective, all these things which I try to do in my work, but he is certainly a master of that, and that's a very memorable. I remember that and taking encouragement from that. I thought, okay, if you can do it, perhaps I can do that, and on we went.
Yeah, because it is all just people after all, and building together good teams that make it work.
Yes.
Okay, so I was just going to ask you about that King's Cross station scene at the end of I'm assuming it's in the end movie. Did you have to think about that for a while? Sometimes when you're creating a scene or a part of the movie, do you have to sit on it for a while and think about it? I mean, do you just wait for the research to come in and sort of spread it all out and just contemplate for a few days, or?
No, absolutely that. I think flashes of inspiration are, for me, quite hard to come by. I often sit in front of a blank sheet of paper and struggle and use the eraser a lot. But eventually something will form. And something like that, which is a very difficult concept. I mean, you're talking about the scene with Harry between
yes.
life and death. And
yes. There's not a lot of direction in terms of how the scene is, so that's why I chose that to ask you about. It seems like you had to fill in a lot of...
That got us there. I mean, it was, it was quite a protracted process, really, but we did experiment. The sense of it being very burned out, very, very kind of halating almost. So we experimented with underlit floors. We experimented with different kind of white covering, white paint, white fabric, and the cameraman was involved, and how much to overexpose it, and a series of camera tests were done. So we got there, but as I say, with a great deal of preparation and research, as you rightly identified.
And did you, how, was it way longer than any other scene?
It's a long scene. It isn't way longer than
No, I mean in terms of how long it took you to figure it out.
To figure out. Well, given that the end result was really a very simple set, a very simple white platform surrounded by white walls, and there'll be some visual effects enhancement there. The architecture will be put in, but there was a sketch that Andrew and I prepared, which became the kind of template, and as I say, after that all these materials were experimented with. Difficult to say how long. I mean, experimented with over 2 or 3 weeks, I would say. I don't remember exactly.
And you just were touching on a little bit a kind of an artist's block, not being able to figure out. So you do struggle with that some, even though you have, I mean, because I'm wondering, since it does start with you, do you sometimes, do you just try to just sit one place, or how do you get yourself out of that?
It's hard to, I'm not sure if I'm answering the question properly here, but it's hard to take yourself to the drawing table and sit in front of a white sheet of paper.
I completely agree.
It's really hard to do that. But what I've learned over the years is that once I do it, something will come. It will, and it always has, and I pray that it always will.
I think some people just
go without an idea in your head, and just the act of making marks, and then the marks become very simple forms, and the simple forms become architecture, and then the architecture has a texture, has an antiquity, is lined with books, or is lined with paintings, or it's the stages that develop. The initial 1 or 2 stages are the important ones that get you going, and then the thing starts to flow faster and faster.
Do you recall any particular flash of inspiration where you just came up with it sort of all at once in a moment of realization?
I'm not sure that I do.
I don't. I'm just curious because, it seems like there are so many different types of scenes and problems to be solved and sort of, riddles when it comes to the complete visual look. I'm just wondering, I mean, it's just a piece by piece by piece thing, or sometimes you just kind of think, I know exactly what to do.
Yeah. It's not quite as... I think Picasso, I think there was a famous Hollywood designer, John DeCure, and he certainly... certain very, very lucky people can see an image in their head, complete, fully formed, fully rendered, fully colored, and all they have to do is just reproduce this picture in their head. I think that's a very rare talent, and I don't have it at all. And so John DeCure, by the way, is legendary for taking plane trips and setting off with a sheaf of white paper, letter-sized regular paper, and he would sit on the plane and he would start drawing in the top left-hand corner and work his way down to the bottom right-hand corner, then take the next sheet of paper, start in the top left-hand corner and draw down to the bottom right, and would step off the plane with maybe 12 small sheets of paper, walk into his art department in the studio, give it to the junior and say, stick those together. Would, and there was the most wonderful pencil drawing of this big panoramic scene, and all the 12 images fitted together beautifully. I'm sure that's exaggerated, but essentially true, what he was able to do.
Well, if you get to the same place, it doesn't matter whether it's a flash of inspiration or it takes sitting at a blank sheet of paper and building it slowly. If the end result is beautiful, it doesn't matter which way you come from.
I think that's true. Absolutely, I think that's true. And as I say, it is gratifying that if you work at it, it does come. It does.
Do you think... I had read about you that sometimes you look at your some of the movies that you've done, and you see scenes and you don't like to look at them because they're not exactly the way you wanted them to be. Do you think that it's difficult for artists to create, as a means to an end? So in other words, you're a production designer, so you have a hand in the finished product, but then once it's done, it's there and people keep seeing it over and over and over again. Do you think that's difficult, or do you think that's gratifying at the same time and just sort of a double-edged sword, sort of good and bad at the same time?
I think years ago, that what was captured in camera was it. It was there forever, and you'd see that movie 20 years later, and you would see the thing you hated, and it would be just as painful as when you compromised in the first place for whatever reason. Now, it's not as painful. I think you get smarter as you get older. Fortunately, you get smarter about spotting and heading off the compromise. But also, there's the tools are different. Visual effects have certainly in the Harry Potter movies have such a big part to play that they are able to, if something does go wrong, something I regret even, they are able to change it for the better. That's quite an expensive process, but also digital grading is with there's often a grader and working with the cameraman, with the DOP, and I would be able to talk to them and say, look, I just think that wall there is just receiving too much light, or whatever it is, or the colour of that piece of furniture is particularly ugly, and it can be adjusted relatively easily. So technology has made that process easier, and so is now very gratifying to be able to work with the grader, digital grader, and the cameraman, and be part of those decisions. Sorry, that's a complicated answer, and I don't know.
No, it makes sense. Do you see the sketches and the art that you do in the process of making these finished visual scenes as fine art, or do you see them only as a means to an end, or do you see them as both?
I think they are just a means to an end. I think they are craft, really, part of the craft. I think somebody like Rob Bliss, who designed the Thestrals, designed Dobby, is able to draw so beautifully that it does lift off into something slightly more sublime, you know.
So you see yours more as directions to...
Mine are pencil sketches. They are sketches. I mean, I love drawing, and I love, you know, I love fine art drawing as opposed to architectural drawing, or as well as architectural drawing. So I do, you know, I take that passion with me into the work. But as I say, these guys that sit and draw all day long and draw human anatomy, creature anatomy all day long, they start out extremely talented, and they refine their talent to such an extent the results are absolutely exquisite.
And you would number...
I can only admire it.
Andrew Williamson as well, yeah, in that list, because
Yes,
I've seen some of his work.
Their skills are so honed, you know, so clever.
And so it's a matter of you see your work as, there's a little bit of your aesthetic, though, in your drawings. You do infuse a little bit of your own artistic sensibilities in them. Do you try to do that, or do you?
I do. Well, on two levels. As I say, I consider it initially as a piece of sculpture, as a piece of architectural form that is kind of sculpture in an abstract kind of way. And then I'm also very keen on architectural detail. I've enjoyed studying it all these years. I enjoy getting it right, and it frustrates and annoys me when I see it being got wrong on other movies, other people, you know. So on those two levels, I definitely try to put my stamp on it and hold on to it too, as it goes through the process. You know, technical draftsman drawing it, those blueprints then going to the craftsmen that make it. There are several stages at which something could go wrong, something could get changed, could get compromised. So I absolutely sit on that and make sure that those things don't happen.
Do you think that these artists that you just referred to, the ones creating the creatures and Andrew Williamson, do you think they would see their work as fine art, or do you think they would also see their work as a means to an end? Because, you know, the reason I ask is that my experience with, you know, when I handle film art, because I sell some production art and some interpretive art, you know, and then campaign art, all different kinds of things having to do with film, that a lot of the artists themselves don't see it because they work all day at the craft of, you know, they're part of the movie making experience. Then they extract their own, you know, whatever they see as their own fine art, I use in air quotes, apart from the work that they do in the films.
Yes.
And, you know, it's interesting because when I just did an interview with the curator of the Norman Rockwell show that's in D.C., in Washington, D.C., and she was talking about Norman Rockwell, who never sold his art because he didn't see it as art. He gave it away, and he thought of it as a means to an end because it was advertising art. So it's, to me, interesting now that, you know, having a gallery and I sell the art, but yet even the artists themselves don't see it that way.
I think it isn't quite clear cut, is it?
No.
I think because it's storytelling, that's a significant difference between fine art and the kind of art we're talking about. I think this serves the purpose of the story and tells the story. It's narrative art in a way that fine art can be. A lot of Victorian painting was, but it doesn't have to be. You know, a fine artist can start drawing, painting, and can end up anywhere. It doesn't matter where it takes him. But these guys have to end up in having told a specific story and represent a specific place. So it is illustration as opposed to fine art in that sense. But nonetheless, they get so good at it that I think their responses to their own work are the same as it would be for fine art, because they're so damn good at it, and because what they do is kind of exquisite.
And also there's an argument to be made for that the fact that they have to arrive somewhere specific and they're still able to imbue the work with their own beautiful skills and talent, that's, in a weird way, I think that's even more a statement of their talent and their flexibility and creativity.
I agree. I absolutely would agree. Yeah.
And that's why we sell illustrators, is because to be able to give it something that nobody, you hire these particular artists to work with you because of their sensibility and their artistic talent. You choose them over others for those reasons.
Yes, you do. Exactly that. Exactly. Because very obviously there are different levels of skill in that fraternity. Those guys that do illustration for movies, there are some are very, very much better than others, and
you probably have the best working with you, I'm guessing.
Well, I think so. I mean, certainly the best available in this country, But
so, what would you say to artists and new filmmakers and people who want to do what you do for a living, who are younger and just getting into it? Do you have any advice or suggestions or thoughts, wisdom to impart? I always feel compelled to ask.
I could do it given an hour or two, but to do it in a sentence or two is pretty difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
The world is changing so fast. I think visual effects are a bigger and bigger part of modern movie making. I know there are a great deal of inexpensive documentaries made because video equipment's so inexpensive now, but nonetheless, Hollywood films are by and large more and more driven by visual effects. The effects themselves are becoming cheaper. I'm sure, and will go on doing so, and the physical set will become more expensive than the virtual one. And there's also, those guys come from a different tradition, that kind of IT tradition. They're computer technicians first, and architects and artists second, whereas traditionally designers and the art department are the other way around. So I think there's something to address there. I think designers have to get a double education and make sure that they're equally proficient in both, it seems to me.
And specifically, too, to not neglect or forget about the history of art and of where it's coming from, because to me, that's, without that, then you can be incredibly proficient on the computer, but without that kind of knowledge, then you don't have anything to to back it up. You don't have any history.
That's it. That's exactly it. Yeah. In the 18th, 19th century, any builder could build an elegant house in that it was a tradition. He followed traditional methods, a traditional aesthetic, traditional proportions, and it was part of him, and he grew up with it. Nowadays, there's been a great sort of rupture in that continuity of tradition with modernism, but also with CAD programs, with computer programs that kind of largely do it for you. So now, the ordinary builder isn't able to build an elegant home at all. Only good architects build good buildings these days, it seems to me. So there's and that in a way can and is happening in the movie industry, that those guys who studied classicism, the history of painting, history of art, if they're not careful, they'll kind of fall off a cliff as technology takes over, or has already taken over. So they need to, the technicians need to get the fine art background and the designers and artists need obviously to understand the technology and maybe grow closer together and become the same department eventually.
All right, so I have two more questions for you. The first is, what are you most excited for the fans of Harry Potter to see in the last two movies?
Sorry, for the what of Harry Potter?
From the fans who've been, seeing steadily from the first movie to.
Exciting for them to see.
Yeah, that you took on, that's new and exciting to these last movies.
Yes.
What do you think? What are you the most excited for people to see and be received and hear what they have to say about it?
In part one, the Malfoy Manor we already touched on a bit. I think that's a good, strong architectural statement, the kind of which I've always enjoyed.
And it starts the movie, so if you like that, you're pretty well set.
Exactly, it starts the movie, and then we go back there later. The Ministry, again, we're revisiting the Ministry, but it's a big deal in part one, a really big deal. And
I did want to mention, I love the fact that it's so modern. It reminds me of a sci-fi movie. That little section, with they're just people all, it's like a hive.
Yes.
I love it.
Well, more of that. But a new area, Umbridge is in control, and we go into Umbridge office and see the typing pool outside our office. So
more kittens.
There's another sort of atrium space beyond that. So quite pleased with that. Quite pleased with the new statue, this idealized political statue that has replaced the old one, described in the books as the Muggles oppressing the wizard, these idealized wizarding figures, wizard and witch, oppressing the Muggles, squashed beneath them. It's a kind of Stalinist piece of propaganda, the sculpture, done by a great sculptor, actually, Julian Murray.
I love propaganda, so I'm going to really be excited to see that.
Good. And then in part two, the big thing is the destruction of Hogwarts. And I couldn't just go around and knock holes in what we already had. It had to be reinvented to a large extent. A ruined building has to be considered. The profile has to be good, has to be strong. Therefore, it has to be designed as a ruin rather than just the original design knocked about a bit.
Also, the architecture juxtaposed with the people and the death involved. The way that in the books I remember really well at the end where there are the bodies against the architecture. And the kind of light that you use in that, it's going to be very interesting.
Yes, the big standoff. Finally, the final standoff between Voldemort and Harry is in the courtyard in front of the school, and the light and what in effect is a sunrise eventually is very effective in that. I have to say I haven't seen it, just as you haven't, part two.
Oh, you haven't seen the whole thing yet?
No, I haven't seen it. No. We're going to have to wait till July, aren't we?
No, but it's not. Is it completely done?
No, not at all. No, post-production is in happening right now, and there are masses of visual effects shots in the works at the various visual effects houses around being worked on. So they'll trickle in, and certainly what the scene I've just described will have a big visual effect element. So we'll see. I'll be as eager to see it as you are, perhaps more.
I don't know. I'm pretty excited, but it's your creation. So, what is next for you? Do you plan in advance the movies that you're going to be working on in the next few years, or how do you do that?
No, I wait for the phone to ring.
For crying out loud! It doesn't ring incessantly.
No, not at the moment.
You've been busy.
I got plenty to do, just tidying up my office, my little office, and masses to do. So I'm not worried about that. But
So you just take them as you get offered and contemplate, and make sure it's sort of going to expand you as an artist.
Yes, I would always choose the quality of the script rather than the design challenge. I've always said that to myself and to other people. I think that's the most important thing.
And do you bring? Do you base it on also the directors that are going to be involved?
Yes, absolutely.
I would think that would be a major aspect,
Yeah,
because
it is.
You have worked with the best.
Well, yes, some very good ones. Yes, yeah. The changing directors on Harry Potter there's been an interesting succession of directors there. You know, so that relationship is absolutely key.
And it's they were perfect for each of the movies that, you know, when they did switch, it seemed to me to be aesthetically perfect for
I think so.
the way that they expanded the series.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for talking to me today. I'm really excited about seeing the movies. I spoke to the Warner Brothers people. They're going to supposedly send me some of your concept art so that I can put it in there. And I'm assuming that they will forward you all, you know, my website is ArtInsights Magazine. Well, it's my gallery is ArtInsights, but my website is ArtInsights Magazine. So if you wanted to go on there, if you get curious, then you can go. I'm probably going to do it. If it turns out that that the audio works, then I'll do it both in audio and written down, because I find, for me, I prefer reading it than I want to hear it. I don't want to sit and listen to something. I prefer reading it slowly. So I give that option to my viewership as well.
Oh, great.
And thank you so much for all your time, and good luck.
I enjoyed it.